All right, welcome everyone to another edition of our community calls. This episode, I guess, will be focusing on insurance questions and the current status of the insurance situation for climbing gyms here in the US. We've got Monument Insurance with us today, and they're going to be sharing their insights. They are the administrators of the CWA insurance program. So a lot of you will have already contacted them and be in continuous contact with them throughout this whole crisis. Our agenda today will be much like other calls. We'll start with a quick tutorial about Zoom and where we'd like you to put your questions and comments, cover some basic ground rules, and then we'll dive right into that discussion. We'll cover things like just a general insurance program update, to let you know what's happening with the CWA program at the moment. We'll cover some basic advice on business income and business interruption policies that you guys may have. And then we'll also touch on the legal and legislative developments that Monument's been working towards over the last few weeks. For anyone who hasn't been on our calls before, we have the Zoom chat feature. It's down in the lower left of your screen, towards the middle, but the left-hand button. When you're chatting, you have the option to select all panelists, which will just go to our friends from Monument and the CWA staff. Or you can select all panelists and attendees. That'll allow you to chat amongst yourselves and share any information you'd like to. Will Monument is speaking and starting even now. Go ahead and start typing any questions you have into the question and answer box. If you see a question that you want to ask that's already been typed in, just go ahead and upvote it, and we'll make sure that the most popular questions get addressed, and that'll help us filter things and keep the conversation running smoothly. Speaking of having the conversation run smoothly, we'll have the same ground rules that we always do. Keep away from any personal political commentary. Be polite and respectful to our friends from Monument and the CW staff and each other. And if anyone violates those rules, we will remove them just to keep everyone's experience as positive as possible. As I mentioned, our presenters today are from Monument Sports Group. They are the administrators of the CWA's insurance program for you guys, and they also work in a lot of professional and commercial sports venues. Mark started Monument Sports with his partner Chris back in August of 2000, so they're just coming up on 20 years in this space. And then for anyone who doesn't know it, another really important thing to highlight is that Mark and his partners also run SCORE, which is a multi-sport facility in Virginia. So they are living the same challenges that you are with your gyms through that facility. Will Jorgensen, who's also on the phone call, he's the account executive for the CWA insurance program. Anyone who's in that program, I'm sure, has already met him and spoken with him maybe several times over the last number of weeks. But Will actually began at that SCORE facility in 2007, so he has a little bit of experience, for anyone who doesn't know it, on both sides of these issues that we're facing. So without further ado, I'm going to hand this over to Mark and Will, and they'll start to fill you in on some of these basic topics, and then we can get into some details with your questions and answers, which again, you should just go ahead and enter into that question and answer dialog box down at the center of your screen.
Hello, everybody. I will go first since I'm older. One thing that I'll add to what Garnet said is that, Will and my partner Chris Fox are both experienced climbers, very experienced. And at our sports facility, as Garnet mentioned, we actually have a climbing gym, good friends of ours at Peak Experience, who are our friends and technically tenants at our place. So both the sports facility and Peak Experiences are closed down currently in Virginia, like most of you are, I'm sure. So as far as Monument Sports is concerned, 20 years since I had the idea to develop a program, specifically for people that in the sports world, and knock on wood, it's gone well over the number of years. And we have been handling the CWA insurance program since 2013. And I think, our experience in running sports programs, was why we were attracted and why the CWA was attracted to us, and I would hope that people think that it's been a pretty good relationship thus far. So with that, I'll turn it over to Will.
Thanks, guys. We wanted to try to get through just a few core topics quickly, and really leave it open for questions, and be totally available to answer any questions that you may have. So to give kind of a quick summary of what we're seeing in the industry and what has been happening. So I know in the first community call, we were encouraging everyone to file business income or business interruption claims, with the full expectation that they would be denied due to virus-related exclusions. And we're also seeing adjusters mention things like no direct physical damage. If you have not filed a loss of income claim, whether with us or through a local agent or a regional carrier, we're still encouraging folks to do that, to continue to put pressure on the industry, these carriers to make coverage determinations, but also to keep the pressure on for things like legal and legislative developments. We fully expect this to play out in the courts, and we're starting to see the first few lawsuits. We're starting to see legislation come out in various states where government entities are trying to force carriers to pay loss of income claims due to COVID-19. Regardless of specific exclusions. One thing we want to make clear is this is going to be a long process and most likely will play out at the national level. But if you have any contacts, we continue to encourage people to leverage those as best they can, make them aware of the situation, and to work with the CWA on their advocacy efforts. I know there are petitions out there, and Mark and Chris have been in contact with our own congresspeople and senators trying to get this in front of more and more people. It's going to be a long journey, but in any case, we want everyone to be working together and trying to push that along. So the biggest update that we have, and I know it was just put out in an announcement, has to do with the carriers trying to provide relief. Step one of that process was always trying to push, payments out, get things deferred, get invoices pushed back, basically to create and buy time, so folks weren't having a financial burden in the immediate. That allowed us to then go and begin the discussions with the carriers on, what is the path forward? What are the best plans? And I know it probably feels like it's been an eternity. The carriers, any exceptions that they make for our program, they have to roll these out to all programs across all industries nationwide. So it's definitely a tough thing to do, but fortunately, we do have a path going forward. And so we'll be talking with everyone about that, and happy to answer any questions. But things that will help us, reach out individually. I know it's going to be difficult, but try to have some sort of revised projection for revenues in hand. What we're telling folks is, okay, if you had actual numbers up to a certain point, or if you had an annual projection for the year, we're seeing folks start to reduce those by anywhere from 25 to 33%, rough range. Carriers are looking at making midterm adjustments, reducing renewals, switch policies to audited in case projections just aren't conservative enough. The main point is that they're just trying to be as flexible as possible. Everything is going to be done on a case-by-case basis, depending on where you are in the policy period. Are you coming up for renewal? Did you just renew? Are you in the middle of your term? So everyone's situation is going to be a bit unique. But bottom line is, reach out to us. We're trying to work as quickly as we can with everybody, and the carriers doing everything they can to be flexible and create some relief.
Thank Will. Can I jump in 1 second, please?
Go for it.
Everybody, let Will take a breath. First of all, you mentioned a few things. I'd like to say that the carrier that we work with is more expert in the space, in the sports and recreation space. So they've really have been ahead of the curve compared to some of the other insurance companies we deal with as far as understanding the process and what is going to be necessary. We'll throw out a few other terms, like audited policies, which just in layman's terms is basically different than what we have now. Now we are unaudited. So it's in an honor system based on your anticipated revenue, your member counts, but audited will work to your advantage in this special situation. So that's basically just truing up, true up at the end of the policy period. So anyway, Will, I just wanted to speak a little English.
Yep, absolutely. And again, we kind of just want to give a general summary and then open this up to questions. And I'm sure a lot of this will be clarified through that process. Because again, every situation is going to be unique. Like Mark said, most people in the program are currently on a non-audited policy, unless there's a specific jurisdictional requirement, a state requirement. But yeah, that's one option we're looking at with the carriers as we start to make changes. So without further ado, want to open everything up to questions and get the discussion rolling.
Yeah, so everyone, please go ahead and type those questions into that question and answer dialog box, anything you might have at all. To start with, we've got one question right now about how someone should start that filing process, I assume for the business interruption claim. So should they just give you guys a call or use the portal on the Monument site?
Call or email would be perfect. There won't be any extensive paperwork or anything like that. We'll be able to get it all processed on your behalf. And carriers right now are a bit backed up, but usually a claims adjuster will reach out to you within 24 to 48 hours to get any additional information that's needed.
And at Monument, Zach Morgan, who a lot of you out there may know, or is our claim director. So he's been working almost nonstop on this for all of our programs and clients. So he's a great resource. But you can send him to Will. You have Will's email or mine or the MSG at monumentsports.com. But please call. It's nice to talk through the process with everyone.
We've got a question here about the legislative support for business insurance policies. So yeah, wondering like what I would assume probably the question is largely about timeline, like what sort of timeline will there be for those claims to potentially be redressed? And I guess maybe a follow-up question to that I'll add on to it is, what's the likelihood? Do you guys what sort of likelihood do you guys see for something like the Terrorism Risk Insurance Act being passed around these issues?
All right, I'll tackle this one first, Will. Just a little bit of the background. The communicable disease virus exclusions were actually added to policies in end of 2006, 2007, after the SARS epidemic. So the insurance companies paid out a tremendous amount of money. And again, nobody needs to cry for them. We're not insurance company apologists, but they put the exclusions in there for a reason. And this current pandemic, is really being addressed by what they wanted. So they are lined up. They've got great attorneys. They've had a lot of years to practice for this. But to answer the specific question about legislation, well, let me finish first. I think the likelihood of having insurance companies break ranks and pay claims, highly unlikely, because once a precedent is set, the others, would follow, and they don't want to do that. But what Garnet is alluding to, and part of the question, and why we've been pushing legislatively, you've seen legislation in New Jersey, New York, Louisiana. You saw the French Laundry restaurant people got together with other restaurateurs. So the insurance companies are aware that something might be brought upon them. So I think they would be prepared. We are just trying to shepherd and give information to, the Senator Warner and some of our Congress people locally, their small business specialists, to let them know how we feel about the process. And those talks have been really good. But as far as a timeline, Garnet,
Yeah,
I think you'll see the next phase of stimulus come through, and insurance may be mentioned. A lot of the wording in the first stimulus bill seemed like it had an insurance-worded person in it because it sounded like business income or business interruption language. So sorry for the rambling response, but yeah, I wouldn't expect anything next week, but I think you might see some things happening.
yeah, that's actually a really interesting insight. So, which parts of that act kind of gave you that clue that there was maybe some insurance think involved?
Just that they were recognizing, like parsing out payroll from other expenses. When you have a covered business interruption claim, like a lot of us have had, we had one at SCORE. We had an air dome that collapsed during the huge snowstorm in 2016. And, it's forensic accounting. So basically you're getting paid your net profit plus any ongoing or continuing expenses. And that's what a lot of the act and the applications seem to speak to. So it seemed like there was somebody who had some intel that was part of that process.
All right. So we've got switching gears just slightly. Someone has a renewal coming up May 1st. This might be a question for you, Will. They're wondering how billing might work with some of these deferment plans that are getting kicked into gear.
Sure, good question. One thing in particular, reach out individually so we can actually talk about how the carrier is going to provide some changes to the policy to provide immediate relief over the policy period. But generally speaking, the carriers are actually starting to put out rules deferring payments anywhere up to 60 days. So that includes, let's say, if you're on an installment plan of some sort, a down payment invoice could be pushed an additional 60 days out on top of a 30-day due date. And subsequent, invoices, will probably be pushed back as well, though that's not necessarily defined at this point. The states are actually weighing in and trying to put requirements in place so policies can't be canceled and invoices are actually pushed back, but that's state by state right now. So in any case, if you have an individual renewal coming up, reach out directly and we'll walk through all the different options together.
Okay. And this might be a little harder question, but just to follow up from me on that, I know you guys have been kind of keeping tabs on what other carriers and what other programs out in the world are doing, or at least in the US are doing. Do you find that that's kind of the norm across the insurance world at this point, those availability of those types of deferments, or is this something that is a particular advantage that we have being part of a larger group policy?
Yeah, there's no question that being part of a group program, and this is not a self-serving statement, but it's just true that when you command enough of an industry, you're able to, wield a little more power in that. But I was going to say before you answered the question, the silver lining for me, I've actually been kind of heartened by, the insurance companies, not just our carrier for CWA, because we have a few carriers that we use. We have our main carrier that we use, but everybody has shown some humanity, which is nice to see. It's obviously self-serving because they want to keep people insured. They don't want cancellations any more than you want policies to cancel. So our goal from the beginning was to give all of us breathing room, us as in, owning a sports facility to owning a climbing gym. So get the pressure of the immediate payments, off your brain. And then second phase is working hard to recognize, the revenue that we're all losing. So it was kind of that two-part process.
Okay. This is actually a great follow-up question to the previous question on legislation, but it kind of ties into that comment as well, and like what Monument's role is for us. So someone had a follow-up question on the legislative support. Curious whether Monument has any sort of conflict of interest in advocating for or against that legislation, since you work with us and you work with the insurance companies. Or are you in the perfect position to be advocating for that, since you cross both of those areas?
About three answers: no, yes, maybe. No, hopefully the answer is no. I think especially everybody's kind of been, everything's raw, like, everybody's working to try to make it happen. So I think it has been when Chris and I have had our lobbying efforts, we worked through a local lobbyist who introduced us, passed us up, upstream, for lack of a better term. So I think, given that we are in the insurance business, but also had a small sports and recreation business that was affected, gave us a little more street cred. And no, nobody's mentioned, like even our attorneys have not mentioned conflict of interest. They just say, be careful what you say. But to be honest, that has gone well. We've been really, I think, energized a little bit by, people actually listening.
I'll add in as well. Monument is set up in a very unique way, where when people think of an agent, they think of, let's say, your State Farm agent, where they only represent State Farm or Geico or Allstate, whoever. And then when you think of a broker, you think, okay, they go out and they shop on my behalf. They're working directly for me. We maintain a unique status in that we're an independent agency that, we do have these exclusive relationships with program carriers. But we maintain our independent status, and we do that to work on behalf of groups like the CWA. So even though we do represent and shop for particular carriers, our interests are aligned with the association. And trying to represent all of our clients and support them as best we can. So in terms of a conflict, we want to do whatever we can to support people making it through this, surviving as a business. And if that results in legislation paying claims, then yes, when we're aligned with the association.
All right. Yeah, thanks for that. Going back to the deferments and renewal processes, and you might have some elaboration on this, Mark, in terms of like the audited versus non-audited decision. The question we have here is, if during a renewal the forecast is approximately 50% below previous projections, so forecasting a pretty massive loss in income, what kind of renewal problems could someone anticipate with such a drastic change in their paperwork?
Well, I'll go first, and then you can speak to some of the things that we've already been working through. One of the things that's been discussed, not just with this carrier, but with other carriers, is the stimulus bill was kind of set up to get people through a 4-month period. So if you looked at the year in thirds, 33% seems to be the initial revenue reduction number that the companies are honing in on. As Will said, we want to speak to each of you individually, and we already have. So yeah, I mean, if somebody will wait, and so Garnet, to your question about audits, let's say we go in with a 33% reduction or a 30%, 25. An audit means that if you do have a 50% reduction, then at the end of the year, you will have even a further refund that would either come to you in the form of a check, or you would apply it to next year's renewal. But as long as everything is, kosher, for lack of a better term, it's Passover, so I guess I can say kosher. The renewal process should go as it always has, and that would be based on your gym operations. And Will, and Chris work really hard day to day to make sure that the gym operations are, I guess, as good or better, as they were and as they can be.
Right. Yeah. One reason we were looking at policy audits in particular, and we think it makes sense here, is to deal with situations where projections could be very, very low compared to what they were on an existing policy, or they may not be low enough, right? We don't know how long gym closures will affect us. So that being said, one thing to consider is if you do have a good turnaround, the audit means that at the end of the policy term, if you do better than what was projected on the renewal, you'll have an invoice at the end of the term. So we definitely want to try to walk the line and avoid that if at all possible. So we'll work with you on trying to figure out what new projection makes sense. And again, we can look at prior policy term, we can look at actual revenue up to closing, we can look at historical trends. I know I've had that conversation with a number of gyms that their member base during certain months of the year, they actually tend to freeze their memberships because of their location. There's set months where they can actually get outside. So during that period of time, revenues are very, very low compared to what happens over the winter time. And the winter and the spring needs to get them through. So there's any number of factors, and every situation is going to be unique, but we'll do what we can to help walk you through that and find a good, flexible solution.
Great. Got a number of, okay, here's one follow-up question to that. So when you're talking about 33 or 50% reductions, what period are you talking, what time period are you talking about? Does that include near zero revenue today, and then some assumption when reopening happens, there's some slight uptick in revenue? Or are you just focusing on that period after reopening?
Got you. So we work on annualized projections usually. So if it's an existing account, let's say that's coming up for renewal, we'll ask about, okay, what was actual revenue for the 12 months of your policy period? See where you ended up and talk to them about, okay, where do you think you'll track for the coming year? In this case, if you're, let's say, in the middle of your policy term, we'll say, okay, what was actual up to the period where you were closed? How does that compare with where you were projecting to go? And so when we think about 25% to 33% or whatever number we're using it based on that annualized projection and reducing it from there. And why we're seeing a lot of folks start with 25% as a reduction is, well, they might not be open for a quarter of their policy term, so they'll use that as a starting point. And then they might ramp up to a higher percentage based on the anticipated ramp up period. In a best case scenario, let's say you even were able to open June 1st, there's going to be a lot of people who are reticent to re-engage. Your hardcore climbers, they probably won't care. They want to come back, they want to get climbing. But your ancillary business, day pass users, birthday parties, school groups in particular, since schools are shut down, that business might have a lag period to recover. So that's what we're looking at and talking about with folks in terms of percentage reductions on the projections.
Great, thanks for that. And I think it's a great segue. We got some questions in here that are more forward-looking towards reopening, and I don't think it's too early to start thinking about some of those. So, yeah, let's chat about that a little bit. So, two of the questions here, I'll kind of combine them into one. Have you guys spent any time yet thinking about what kind of language future waivers should include? I imagine most policies that are out there already would exclude any sort of communicable disease issues, both from the staff and any customer claim standpoints. But should things like this be specifically addressed in a GIMS waiver in the future?
I'll go first, Will. Waivers, is always a great topic, at the summit and in almost every sports client that we have in any relationship. Waivers are state specific as well. So the quick answer to have we put much thought into it is no, because we've been dealing with pants on fire. But yeah, I will guarantee you that you will see some wording introduced. Well, I can't guarantee it, but I would guess that you would. I think right now it's more. It's a great question, but I think it's going to be a little bit down the road. We've not heard from anybody in that regard, have we, Will, thus far?
Not yet. And again, a lot of this will probably play out depending on what even happens from a lawsuit perspective. I think everyone right now is just, reeling to protect themselves, just keep their heads down in terms of the public and the virus itself, and just make it through. I haven't heard of a claim being filed anywhere regarding, I supposedly got the coronavirus at your facility. Knock on wood, that hasn't happened. But yeah, I think any changes to a waiver will be determined by what comes of legislation, lawsuits, etc. And waiver law varies state by state. So that's something to consider when you're discussing with local legal counsel. There are things that you can and cannot address in your waiver. So it could be a situation where a local attorney will recommend it, and it might be a situation where your local attorney will say, nope, we can't include that. We've got to keep this as a bare bones document if we want it to stay as a valid waiver.
The one thing I would add, and this is not necessarily waiver related, Garnet and everyone, be careful about what you're saying now. Like, through our disinfecting and cleaning, we can ensure your child's safety. Well, can you really? Whether it's, coronavirus related or not. So, if, when we first took over the program, we wanted to eliminate the word safe, from signage and websites. That was kind of a hot topic word back then when we first took over. So, risk management is going to be really important as we go forward, especially, when you're, like Will said, in getting the school groups and the birthday parties back in, just being careful about what you can and can't say. Our sports facility, my general manager, put out a wonderful thing on Facebook and all social media. And, we had to change it a little bit because it said, we will ensure your child's safety or your safety. Well, we're going to do our best, but, you got to be careful about what you say and don't say without being too draconian.
Yeah, and I think the CWA is going to do its part to help provide that type of language and wording that you guys can use when you develop those communications. One of the initiatives we have in our planning is to provide posters through the ClimateSmart program that'll help request certain hygiene and behaviors from your customers, but also posters that will broadcast the measures that we would recommend that you take in place to provide kind of the highest standard of care anyway, without using the word safe. And I'm sure that whatever wording we develop will be in partnership with Monument as well, since they're so well versed on that subject. The second question we had in here that was about waivers, I'm going to extract part of it because I think it's kind of an interesting question just from the risk management side of things. So less so worried about claims about someone actually contracting the disease in your gym, but is there any risk management that people need to keep in mind about following social distance regulations, maximum group size, things of that nature? It's kind of an interesting environment right now where we have recommendations from, say, like a mayor or a governor that aren't exactly laws. What sorts of regulations or governmental advice would you say people need to make sure they absolutely follow no matter what, and which ones can they take as guidance?
I'll go first again, Will. I want to remind everybody that, I heard a psychologist say this, at a time like this, every day feels like a month, but it's been less than 40 days from the onset of this thing. So, insurance companies, for them, have been moving at light speed. Our government, has moved at light speed in getting the stimulus bill done. And things were changing so rapidly. In Virginia, I can speak to that. It went from groups of 50 or less to 10 or less in about 3 days. So I would say, in answer to that question, you should be listening to the CDC, but then your local, you're just going to have to determine, who really is the decider, to use an old term, on, what we are supposed to be complying with. I would say, when in doubt, listen to Anthony Fauci, but, the real thing is what your governor and what your local oversight is telling you. But CDC, I don't think you can go wrong, Garnet, in trying to follow what they said. Will, I don't know if...
Yeah, the best advice I've been able to give to folks, because this is just, it's so hard to kind of sort through the messes. If you're looking at this from the perspective of, am I putting myself at greater risk of a lawsuit or a claim by not necessarily following instructions or directions? Hard to say, but what I'm telling folks is, look, if there is a local recommendation and everyone is complying, you don't want to be the lone facility or the lone business that's not going along with it, and trying to do everything you can to stop the spread. Just like on the property side with loss of income claims, and there's standard exclusion forms for transmissible disease, viral pathogen, et cetera, liability policies have the same thing. So I tend to stay more on the conservative risk management side and say, yes, if there's a recommendation, even if it's not, word of law, it's a shutdown, et cetera, you should be looking to comply to better protect yourself, and protect your policies.
I think that's great advice. And to amplify what Mark was saying, your city is probably the most directly applicable source for you. And then after that, I would look to what's usually county-based public health departments in the U.S. Some of them are more statewide, depending on the individual states. Those would be the smallest units below that CDC level that would be very local to you. Looking at another angle of this risk management side of things, so this has all been very customer focused, right? But we also have staff that we have to care for as well. OSHA has some guidelines out there that I'd urge people to look at. Though you can find the links to that on our coronavirus resource. Again, you guys have been dealing with a lot of these immediate business income and deferment issues, so you might not have put a lot of effort into this yet. Anything from the workers' comp and risk management for staff side of things that you'd like to comment on?
That's a good question and a good point. When folks think about work comp related claims, sickness and disease, things like the flu are not usually covered because you can't necessarily prove that it's a work related injury, that I caught the flu from coming into work. That being said, this is such a unique scenario. I don't think we or the NCCI or any work comp carrier out there knows how they're going to respond if they see a work-related coronavirus claim. I know they're going to have to start contending with it with the number of elder care facilities where a lot of this outbreak is, and you've got nurses, you've got doctors, essential personnel having to come to work. So for climbing gyms in particular, we would say follow all local guidelines, recommendations, government orders, et cetera, because we simply don't know how how the policies are going to react.
Yeah, I would just to follow up on that, Garnet. There will definitely be some issues between, workers' compensation and health insurance. Health insurance is going to respond. I predict will be the responder most of the time. But in most states, if somebody does want to take legal action, like, I contracted this at work versus I just contracted it, you don't usually have to take a choice between going at work comp or going civilly or at health insurance. You usually cannot do both. There are a few states that are outliers. But I think you're going to see that this is going to be a health insurance issue more than work comp.
Yeah. On the broader risk management side of that staffing question, one thing I'd be curious about would be, what sort of personal protection equipment you need to provide for staff. Like I said, there's some OSHA guidelines out there identifying low, medium, and high risk staff members outside of the healthcare world even, and some guidance from OSHA on what sort of PPE should be available to staff members at those levels. Again, it's probably like completely individual from gym to gym, but you might want to identify where you identify certain staff members on that risk matrix that OSHA has provided, and make sure that you have PPE available for those members to prevent any sort of lawsuits that could come from that. Another forward-looking question here. I'll just read this as is. How do you think the coronavirus pandemic will affect the cost of general liability insurance policies in the future? Will carriers shy away from insuring coronavirus or insuring industries that are at a higher risk for coronavirus? And maybe as a follow-up question to that, would you consider climbing gyms a higher risk environment than, say, a restaurant or a grocery store even?
Well, I will go first, Will. That's probably the best question I've heard in a while. And the answer is I really don't know. I think it depends on, how the insurance companies are brought in, if there's a vaccine. There's just so many factors to consider if you're an insurance company. There's no question that indoor sport facilities and climbing gyms had to shut down, and just the faucet has been turned off. Restaurants can serve curbside. They can do other things. So I think it's to be determined. But I do think that given that there's going to be a revenue reduction in almost every client we have, both of our programs, not just our climbing wall program, insurance companies do have good memories. They might see this as, you hear the term act of God. They may see this like that, and the only way that they can, make money, because they're for-profit companies, is to, roll up their sleeves and, continue on. But as far as, knowing what they're going to do, I think it's still way too early to know how the pandemic is going to pan out.
Do you see any comparable, and maybe not at this magnitude, of course, but do you see any comparable events in the past that either have or have not affected premiums?
Well, obviously, I'll give you two examples. September 11, even though it was more, obviously localized, it shook the industry. Reinsurers, reinsurers are the people that the insurance companies that you may have sell off or lay off a lot of the risk to. So the reinsurers fled the market after September 11 because of fears of, more terrorist claims. More terrorist acts, et cetera. And that's where you saw the TRIA coverage that you'll see on your policies, or that you've seen. They developed the Terrorism Risk Insurance Act, which has never paid off and hopefully never will. So Garnet, you had mentioned PRIA, Pandemic Risk Insurance Act. that's something that's been discussed by a few academicians, in this area. So, yeah, I think, you will see that kind of thing happening. And then the other one is I mentioned, our air dome, our dome went down 3 years ago. Well, about 75 domes went down along the East Coast in that big storm of January 2016. The average premium for a dome went from about 15 to 20,000, let's say, triple, because, the insurance companies just got hammered on the claims. So again, a lot of it's actuarial. So a lot of it, Garnet, will depend on, what happens in this event. If they don't pay out anything, at least, without government intervention, then they may not see this as a big event. But yeah, you can be sure that they'll, make some adjustments.
Okay. No, thanks for that. I'll find a follow-up question from some of this discussion. Have you seen anyone make a claim off of the coronavirus as a natural disaster and argue that this is a physical, natural virus that has caused the damage and closure to the business? There's currently a case open in this person's state where a business is making that claim.
So the issue is that, I think I said this early in the meeting, this virus, communicable disease, airborne pathogen exclusion was put on after SARS and, a few other, pandemic or virus type events. They had a long time to practice for this, and a lot of attorneys and a lot of money. I think you will see them standing as one in the insurance business to keep those claims from paying off. So I really don't think it matters. I mean, and I know what the suits are all about. I've seen them in every state, or, they're not suits yet in a lot of instances, legislative actions. Some of them are suits, but they're going to try to be resolute that it really doesn't matter whether it's a physical loss or not. Their exclusions are total exclusions. So it's going to be really interesting to see what happens, is all I can tell you.
Yeah. All right. So we're closing in on the top of the hour. I just wanted to give you guys a chance to add any other thoughts that might have come up during this conversation, or things that people should be keeping in mind as they look towards reopening and as they start navigating some of these claim processes.
I actually had a question for everyone, and maybe they can get back to you, after. It seemed to me that one of the biggest issues in the industry before the pandemic was chalk, and dust. Other things that, other risk management. What are the gyms going to do on their own without any of us telling them? To really promote better hygiene or areas, or do you think things are going to be forgotten as soon as we get back to normal?
Yeah, we can open that up to a more general conversation. Anyone who'd like to raise their hand, there's a little button at the very center of your screen. Feel free to raise your hand there, and we'll give you a chance to share maybe some of your thoughts of what you're thinking about doing as we move towards reopening.
And they don't have to yell at me all at once. Will, did you have any other comments on Garnet's question while people are?
I do, and I apologize. I may have to mute myself. We're getting some heavy wind where I'm located. My dogs are answering the call of the wild mainly here. So apologies for that. Yeah. Again, just to reiterate, we're here trying to figure out any way that we can to help provide some relief. So for those who have specific questions, reach out individually, and we'll discuss and try to do whatever we can to help. We're here to work for you guys, and please don't hesitate to reach out with any questions.
Yeah. So Stephanie had something she was going to share, and so let's hear from her.
Hi, Stephanie.
Well, we wait for her to get unmuted. I saw in the chat
Okay.
someone was saying it'd be great to
Right.
commission a study about chalk and its impact on COVID-19. Uh, it's definitely something the CWA is working on. I've got some contacts at universities that are looking at the feasibility of starting some of those studies. So just chatting on the phone with someone yesterday to do so. That system is pretty overloaded, and I think it's hard for them to cut to cut the materials that they have off to smaller scale studies at this point. Everyone is basically focused on different viability studies, whether it's vaccine, antibody, and life or active time studies. But with that said, I do think we'll be able to get some data, hopefully in pretty short order, if it can be piggybacked on some other research. So it's things that the CW is actively looking into, getting that done in a fairly rigorous scientific process, so that we could make some determination. There's a lot of talk out there, right, about liquid chalk and the pH of chalk and how it might affect the virus, SARS-CoV-2 specifically. Um, yeah, so it's just something that needs to be studied, and we'll need some more evidence to make like really strong recommendations there. At this point in time, I would just caution to not to not to not take any of those methods, whether it's liquid chalk or the pH of chalk or anything that you're hearing out there. Just take it with a grain of salt and make your own choices. But as soon as we can, we'll try to get that as some hard data. And so, are you still out there, Stephanie? I think you're unmuted and ready to go if you'd like. All right. Let's see. So just so anyone who can't see it in the comments or the questions, looks like a few people out there are installing different kinds of air filters. If you do use something like a HEPA filter, that the screen size on those filters is smaller than this virus by quite a lot, and they could be effective ways to deal with your air system. Those filters also are, obviously pretty expensive, so keep that in mind with where you put them as well. Looks like a number of people are looking at liquid chalk dispensers and increased hand wash stations. Also, even hand wash stations and hand sanitizing stations prior to entering the building and just in the lobby right before entering the general facility. Um, all right. And yeah, I think those kind of things are, at least from what I've been reading and all the people I've been talking to, are really great, methods, both in terms of being effective, but also in terms of making people feel comfortable. I think it's not wrong to look at the psychological comfort that people need, whether that's signage, messaging that you put out, social media, or in your own facility. And even something like liquid chalk, if that makes people feel better and is an extra step that you can take that's low cost and easy to implement in your facility, why not? It's not going to be worse than anything else. And let's see. Question. I guess the question that Stephanie was going to have is whether we can insist on hand washing. That might be. I don't know if you guys have put any thought into that yet in terms of what people can and can't do to their customers. Probably things like taking temperature screening, or something like insisting on hand washing. Is that something you can police?
Well, I know Stephanie. I know her father's an attorney, so she should ask him. uh, yeah, I think we just have to be, careful about, privacy issues. But I think in the short term, I don't think that a very strong suggestion on the washing of hands is out of the ordinary. I mean, I can't see where anybody would be, put off, although people can be put off on a lot of things. But yeah, I don't see any issue with that.
Yeah, and I think Kenneth here in the chat has a really great point that is worth amplifying. That there's always a lot of focus on the climbing holds themselves, but there's a lot of other areas of your gym that really do need attention, and it's the stuff that you'd see the CDC and the WHO recommending to keep clean. It's those high traffic surfaces of doorknobs, countertops, water fountains, all of those things. That definitely don't ignore that when you're thinking about what you're going to do in your own facility. It's not just about the climbing holds.
Right.
It's a much broader area that you need to pay attention to. And likewise, even right, the back office that your employees are operating in, their computers and those doorknobs and all of those surfaces.
Hey, Garnet, the only thing I would add is the number one, I've used this line forever, you know, when people talk about surveys of places, the number one answer, you know, what people look for all the time, other than, you know, great climbing walls or great soccer fields, is cleanliness of restrooms.
Yeah.
I think I would start there and expand it out, because I think that's going to catch people's eye. So that's just my personal opinion. And, you know, experientially, what I've seen in facilities over the years is if you can have that area clean and expand it out now, I think that will be to your benefit.
Yeah, no, great comments. So I think we're just coming to the top of the hour now, and we'll be closing out. I just wanted to take this opportunity to thank Mark and Will for being with us, and then I'm going to share just some of the other things that are coming up with this webinar series. Our next scheduled call is going to be on Tuesday at 10 a.m., and we'll have the Access Fund to talk about their thoughts about climbing outdoors during the closure. I know some gyms have been on that bandwagon of trying to reduce their members from climbing outside. Some gyms around the country have encouraged their climbers to go and climb outside. So we'll get the Access Fund's thoughts around those issues. And then also on the positive side, some things that you can do with the Access Fund to engage your members will being closed down, and to keep the stoke for getting outside when we can and getting back in the gym when we can. And as always, the CWA is going to be pushing out all of this information through social media, through these webinars, and then you can always go to climbingwallindustry.org/coronavirus to get recordings of these videos and all of the current information that we're putting out. And I would say I liked Mark's comment that every day feels like a month. So we are doing this stuff as fast as we can. A lot of these questions are going to take, especially around cleaning and sanitization, are going to take time, since you actually need the studies to take place for us to give the best possible recommendations. Anything that you guys would like to get in touch with us directly about, we're always here for you. You can just email us directly, call us on the phone. We're happy to chat anytime. And thank you for joining us today. This has been a great call. See you guys on the next call.
Thank you.